Brands are sort of constantly participants, both in culture and in socials and in self-expression.
You don't have to be Coca-Cola to cut through, and that you can grow relative to others and you can gain shares.
You once said to me that you saw Iris as basically a series of sort of petri dishes, a sort of series of experiments.
You're not looking for performance as clicks, you're building a network of connections.
Brands do very well on TikTok by buttoning down and being the humans that they actually are.
Creativity is the only legal unfair advantage in business.
Welcome to the final episode of Iris 25 Entrepreneurs in the Wild Festive Edition. Amazing group of people joining me now to talk about strategy and the role that it plays in just providing edge and energy to the ideas that we're putting in front of clients. So I'm just going to ask Ben. Ben, would you say a few words about yourself? Who are you? What do you do at Iris? What's your journey been?
So I'm Ben Essen, I'm a Chief Strategy Officer at Iris, 17 years into my Iris journey, and joined when strategy was just a small idea in the business, and now it encompasses, I guess I'm a sort of planner by trade, so brand strategy, insights, but we now have all sorts of weird and wonderful data strategy, pricing strategy, and so a lot of it is about trying to mix those things together to something pointed, interesting, and ultimately it's going to make stuff happen, I guess.
Fantastic. And Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm a Senior Strategy Director at Iris. I've been at Iris for just about a year now. A bit of a strange journey into advertising in general. I used to be a lecturer. I'm a semiotician by trade, so really focusing on meanings and culture, and sort of had that sort of art and new media obsession. But yeah, I mostly work on the consumer brands at Iris, so Adidas, Pizza Hut, and the likes. And mostly, I work a lot on cultural innovation. So my work is really thinking through how brands can be better actors in culture for the most part. So that's what I love to do.
Fantastic. And last but not least, John?
Thank you. So I'm not at Iris, and I never was at Iris, but it became a kind of second home to me. I was in the agency business in the 90s. I worked at Place St. Luke's and was the strategy director there. I've written a few books, as I'm sure you've heard from time to time. And it was really early days of Iris. So I think when I first knew you, it was 16 people, and it was in the formative stage. So late in that journey, people like Ben were coming in, you were actually building out strategic function. And yeah, we'll talk about that history, but I was a strategic friend, I think, through some of the early years.
So I didn't realise that you were an author.
Did you not? I never mentioned it.
Do you know that I'm an award-winning podcast?
I do. Yeah.
Look at that.
I'm an award-winning
Rose gold.
Yeah.
That is bronze. That's bronze, actually. It's not rose gold.
That's impressive.
It's very heavy. Thank you for joining us. So, got a lot to cover over the next 20 minutes, half an hour or so. And what I'm quite keen to understand is like strategy, the role that it plays in our business, and also quite interested to sort of understand a little bit more about strategy and culture.
So I'm just going to start quoting John's book, because when I arrived at Iris on day one and I said, "Ooh, do I get some training in the strategy stuff?" My Verity Johnson, head of strategy, gave me John's book and said, "Just read that. That'll do it." And that was all about, I guess, just the idea of like brands as ideas of how you live these days. So the sense that we're all social creatures, we all copy each other, and strategy is defining that what people should be doing through a brand as the idea, essentially, and then those ideas catch on, they get bigger, and strategy is about how you orchestrate that and ignite it.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting way of describing it, and I think if I look back on the sort of Iris journey, most of our journey has not been very well defined at all. And I think you once said to me that you saw Iris as basically a series of sort of petri dishes, a sort of series of experiments, and those experiments got encouraged, managed, pointed, cancelled in some cases, and some of those became just amazing, like world-class, world-changing ideas. And it's just sort of interesting to get you to sort of think about that for a second, and particularly like what's the role that strategy is playing in that process. Because we just spoke with the creative guys, and they didn't really know. It was just like we just did it, and that's a perfectly valid answer in its own right. But it'd be good to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because at that time, strategy had grown up in these big agencies and had become really structured. And it's like strategy is done this way, and there was kind of classic craft skills were things that were celebrated, and we didn't have any of that, and we didn't really want to bring anyone like that in. So we were kind of guessing what strategy was supposed to be, and I think that led to invention. It led to being entrepreneurial and kind of going, well, strategy is being useful in a creative process, and that's really about helping look forward and help people see, when you've got a blank sheet of paper, here's what the answer might look like at the end of all this, and then here are the decisions that we're going to make along the way, the questions that we're going to ask, in order to go from we could do anything to here's the thing we're going to do. And because everything was starting from scratch, different multimedia ideas, it was all about like the problem, the question, what are we actually trying to do? And once you kind of had that clear, then everything else followed, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. And Karen, it was interesting to sort of spend some time with you this week talking about your journey into this industry via academia, and your understanding of participation and how that kind of works in culture, particularly now given social media. So it'd be just good to sort of get your perspective on, particularly social media and how that is shaping culture, and then what does that mean for, a lot of the work that we're doing for clients.
Yeah, so I think the conversation around culture is an interesting one because it always feels as though people talk about culture like it's something that's over there. But really all comms, whether it's on a billboard or it's on socials, is always mediated by the context of culture. We make decisions about what's good or what's not good or what's salient or not based on our kind of cultural values and the things that we've grown up with, that we're built with, or that are contemporary. So when we think about participation, it's also thinking about culture in the lens of participation on social specifically. Like social media is culture. There are a lot of agencies, especially smaller ones coming up now, that have this view that digital culture is culture. It's just another manifestation of the same thing. When you think of people taking videos of themselves dancing or things like that, that to a certain extent is the influence of trends and platforms on enabling people to express themselves. But I think the fundamentals of culture really haven't changed. That we just have new platforms and spaces in which to express them. And people are always participating in the sort of co-creation of brands. When you think of, Stormzy wearing Adidas one day, suddenly that makes a whole new culture, a whole new subculture think of Adidas in a new way. So brands are sort of constantly participants, both in culture and in socials and in self-expression. And I think the thing that's changed the most now is more so that people just have quite a bit more power to participate and co-create with brands than they did before. Before, you'd just be, you'd love the self-determination of Nike, for instance, and that whole idea of willpower from Just Do It, and you would wear something and you would feel like you were expressing yourself. But now that becomes part of how individuals are branding themselves on social. So if you have a social media account, you are also to a certain extent a brand. Like you're choosing what you're communicating about yourself. So in many ways, consumers understand branding better than they ever have before. And that's still all wrapped up within this larger container of culture that mediates all of the ways that we make decisions about what makes a brand good, what makes participating with a brand good, and how does that actually become part of self-expression, which now is in the hands of everyone.
Yeah, I mean, you've been quite heavily involved in TikTok over the years, and I'm still sort of figuring it out, I have to say. I'm still like, how is this even a thing? And I know how important it is in our household because I've got kids. So what is going on there?
Well, TikTok's an interesting one. So I worked with TikTok back in the pandemic when they had an explosion of new users. And they didn't even really understand how it was working. They were saying trends start here. And then TikTok for Business came and said, can you prove this? We'll let you prove it on your own. Like, they didn't interfere with any of the research or strategy. But they really wanted to understand what was it that brands could really latch onto. And if trends were starting there, what did that actually mean for brand partners and advertising on the platform, which they were scaling up at pace, especially in the States. TikTok is sort of, the way that I describe it is like a town square. The sort of hierarchy between people and brands has eroded more than any other social platform. So if you think of Facebook or Instagram, to a certain extent, there was still a space for brands to have a little bit more of a sort of differentiated presence. I think on TikTok, because of the nature of the way that the algorithm works, you'll see a brand and then you'll see a car driving off a bridge and then you'll see some kittens being born. I mean, it's the randomness of it all together.
All my favourite ones.
Yeah, all your favourite types
genres.
of content. And the way that the algorithm serves to you means that brands are now on that same playing field. We've seen a lot of brands do very well on TikTok by sort of buttoning down and acting really human and being the humans that they actually are. Humans are made up of many different people. So I think it's that change of hierarchy when it comes to brands and people and the ways that brands can interact with people that has changed. You no longer have a soapbox. You're sort of all on the same level in this town square.
Yeah.
And in that way, there's great opportunities. But if you go in with more traditional approaches of trying to speak at people, that's when TikTok becomes really difficult to understand. It's sort of embrace the wildness, go wild as people are. And that's when you're able to connect in new ways because of that change in hierarchy.
That's very good. I mean, John, if I could just move to you for a sec. I remember when I first met you were at you were speaking at a client's big sort of event thing, and you were talking about habits. And I just loved how you'd sort of worked through humans and how we actually work and how we decide what we're into and what we're not. And I was really moved by that, and that became a massive input into our thing around participation. It'd be good to get your perspective on Iris, because you've obviously will have a unique perspective, an objective one, and obviously an informed one, because you've been at some amazing places and worked with some amazing clients.
Sure. So I think it's a place that's suited inventors. Some of those have creative trades, some of them have been strategists, but a view of culture would be like when I did geology at college, they call it the lava pillow model, where all the time there's something that's becoming quite solid and then a new thing escapes and has a lot of heat and energy and movement, and then it settles and becomes another lava pillow and so forth. And I worked with a hair care brand in the States that got TikTok early and really got it. I saw the CEO a year later and he said, I've got more interaction on TikTok than all of L'Oreal's brands. And lo and behold, 3 years later, he sold to like Unilever for nearly $1 billion. And it just created an absolute, but what they understood was something very specific within TikTok, which was the conversations between hairstylists and people setting trends and fanatical followers and consumers. And they just got into that in a really good way. And they did that all sorts of ways. And it kind of, I've seen waves like that. And I think there'll be more things coming through after TikTok, where if you're trying to break into markets which are unfairly always kind of monopolistic or whatever, if you're Fritz Cola, we were talking about downstairs, you have to find a new door into the building because you can't afford to compete with the Coca-Colas. But you have this unfair natural vigor and advantage in these places, the wild fringes. But I think also the thing, like when I started writing about this field, and sorry to mention books, then one of my case studies in my first book, and I used the word participation because things had flipped and become co-created even back then. And there was this moment that academics call postmodernism, where people just stopped believing. And literally I'd be in a focus group and people say, I would hold up a board saying it's a hot new lager from Japan. They said, no, it's not. And I said, why not? And they said, well, if it was, you'd be handing me a Japanese can. That's a piece of cardboard. You've just made that up. And people saw through it. And for instance, Levi Strauss across about 10 years was the #1 creative award winner in the world, measured by those big things. And during that year, it lost 13 billion in shareholder value, and the world was taken over by the diesels, the trendier, the equivalent of craft beers in their market, because people would look at that and go, I see the ads, but I know these are the jeans that Jeremy Clarkson wears, and they're not cool. I just think the ads are cool. And there was that disconnect. And at the same time, the internet, digital, all of the successive social media came up, and all of the other things. The exciting thing about me for Iris when I first met you was you were actually practicing what I'd been preaching for about 5 years. But I was part of a previous agency where we pitched loads of clients with the idea that brands were ideas, that you should be making content, educating, forming communities, participation, doing things with people. And some clients bought into that, like with Anita Roddick, we worked on in-store radio instead of ads. But most of them will go, you've never made a TV show or movie before, we'll just hire you to do some trend stuff. And I met you at that conference, and the exciting thing for me, I mean, I can't even remember that thing about habits, but I remember that I met an agency that at the time was doing a guitar tour with Budweiser. You did that crazy thing playing tennis in the dark with fluoro balls.
Right, yeah.
It was like, these guys are literally seeing that we went from 2 or 3 channels where you fire messages at people to 200 plus places where people participate and mingle and meet. And those could be retail places, experience places, content, educate, all of that kind of stuff. And even from a very small base, you were just literally doing those things. My other favourite memory from early Iris, it was all flooding back to me the other day when I was invited to this, was because I was kind of in your ecosystem, and we were at times, like Gala Bingo had a smoking ban. What the fuck do we do about that? Let's get a strategist into the meeting to talk about trends and other things that have gone through big disruption. So it was more a strategic point of view.
Yeah.
You didn't need or have strategists in creative conversations. And I remember you brought me in to work on, I think it was Sony Ericsson, and I read through a creative brief, and there was this brilliantly outspoken northern lady who was the account director who went, whew, I don't know about the rest of you, but that went right over my head. And then we went back to what ideas are we going to do and stuff. And it was sort of, it was a bit of a like jolting start, wasn't it? Because I worked a couple of years ago at Trading View with a design agency, and it's run by Russian fintech guys. And the feedback through the design partner was they actually really like where this is going, but they're just asking, could it be a bit less Oxbridge? And we ended up doing something. We ended up with it. The strategy was the strategy. We ended up their huge visitor website, and it just says "Look First," their Trading View, and Alex Honnold, who they sponsored as if they were Red Bull, who's the free solo guy, and the full headline was "Look First, then Leap." So they completely took on board the strategic ideas. They just weren't ready to sit through a presentation where I talked about Cartier-Bresson and the decisive moment and other stuff. They just needed the big picture with the climber. And that's what saved me as well from being an academic in a way, because I've always had academic interest, is working with the people who make stuff that people so care about. Like when we went with Nando's, people having tattoos of the brand, and participation isn't a metaphor in those contexts. People think it's theirs.
It's really interesting, and we've had some real problems agreeing between us about what participation means. And sometimes it's what we do, sometimes it's how we do it. Is it mission? Is it what even is it? So that in itself, is participation. And what's great about that is, it's okay to have an interpretation. What's bad about it is it loses its sort of clarity, loses its conviction. And if you're a really ambitious client, there is something reassuring about your agency partner and really knowing what their philosophy means and what it can do for you. There's been quite a few sort of iterations of it over the years, haven't there? And I know we were talking about this the other day about competitive edge. It's actually the power that creates your edge. It makes you competitive.
Yeah, I think that philosophy is like the key thing for me. It's the idea of, if you're Apple, then your philosophy needs to work at this macro level when you're talking.
What about if you're Samsung?
Well, it's embedded at this level up here. It also needs to work in the conversation around what chip we're putting into the next product and everything in between. I think it's the same with like an agency and participation. So you've got an idea that this is the way the world works these days. Everything has changed. Sort of democratic creativity, kind of power being distributed, all these kind of big ideas about how the world's been flipped upside down and will continue to be for the next 20, 30 years. And then you've got, hey, we're doing this cool kind of campaign where we're playing tennis in the dark, and it needs to describe both those things and everything in between. So I think part of the can you pin it down is well, what are we applying it to? And for me, we did some training earlier this year where we were like, right, we're just going to go to every single person in Iris and talk about what participation is, and then get them to explain it back to us. And I ended up in a kind of one-on-one call with one of our accounts payable team in Skopje, and she described to me what participation was, and it was everything that we're talking about in terms of community. She's like, yeah, I get it. It's like, this is the kind of brands I want to be a part of. And then I said, how does it apply to your role? And she said, well, my role's completely changed in the last 5 years, because I used to have to, pay 3 companies for the TV ad that we were making. And I've just done this Samsung thing where we were working with creators in skate. And I had about 130 different people that I had to keep happy and make sure they're paid on time, because they're all part of this community that is building a brand narrative for Samsung. And I was just like, okay, that's when you see the difference. It's like your operating system, everyone within that business is operating differently because of this philosophy around participation. And I think that's when you start to go, okay, it's the big idea and it's everything in between.
Yeah, your point on that whole idea of what you apply it to, I think, is the core of it, because it's both an ideology, but also the through line to action. And that has to sort of come from both sides, because you have to be externally focused with participation. Where are we activating? What communities are we activating in? But it always still has to link back up to ideology. So it's like participation is always in tension with both that action and ideology piece. And like what you apply it to is sort of half of the story, half of the inspiration before you even, start to triangulate it back for brands. So I really love that piece.
Exactly. That was the old agency process, and all the tools that we inherited that I was trained with, brand onions, targeting bills, all of this kind of stuff, was developed in the 1950s to help ad agencies sell messaging ads, often newspaper ads with, direct response and coupons, and the David Ogilvy model. And the thing that we did in my agency, even though we didn't make enough of these we didn't make tennis tournaments and things, but we sort of had enough examples of that to realize that the creative brief we'd inherited just didn't work. And so we ripped it up with its 12 headings that had a JWT, and we had 2 headings, which is why, which is your intentionality, and how.
Yeah.
And that's the inventor piece. If you're making in-store radio for Body Shop and you're intending it to have some business, how's it going to work? Do we put ads in it? Do we make it on themes that actually grow our markets, like against animal testing and hemp and things? And it was a genuine naive question. Why would a client spend money to gain commercial advantage on this rather than the 100 other things that the CTO and other people want? But then you have to find a really good answer to how. And even within advertising, back in those days, we decided to divert IKEA's advertising budgets from talking about the reasonably priced Swedish furniture to attacking British taste. And the reason was that the only thing that drove anything in that market was awareness and noise. They were in a real minority. Most of the country had Dado Rails and Laura Ashley, and we sort of needed to be the Modern Furniture Council. There weren't many others, but it was figuring out the sort of stuff, even using advertising, that later just became day to day when you're going, how do I activate an electronics brand from Korea credibly with this bunch of creators and get something moving? And it's sort of the inventor question, just trying to figure out how that's going to work and the pathways, which goes back to the thing on habits. That's what we're talking about, is that retailers are brilliant on programming experiences and habits. And
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And one of the things I've sort of experienced over the last few years, especially since COVID and the sort of Zoomification of the industry, lots of people working from home, lots of remote relationships, is that there's more short-termism. It's more rational. It's more data-driven. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it is a challenge, though, if it comes at the expense of the magic, the experiments, let's just do it and see how it goes. But I am seeing that the industry is sort of inclined now to be more short-termist and more, into the proof. I don't know if you guys are sort of seeing any of that in your...
Well, we saw it with Nike as well, in terms of them really focusing on their digital journeys and also like paring back quite a bit on their city marketing and the things that used to make them a participation brand the best. But I think there's also there's a separate thing that's happening at the same time, that smaller brands are looking more long-term. It's why we start to see the rise of smaller challenger brands, like social first brands that, like you mentioned with your hair care brand, are doing so well because they're sort of capitalizing on that longer term vision by giving people something to believe in or to connect in their identity, like investing in what on the surface might seem like some ideological brand marketing. Why does Marc Jacobs need to do really incredibly absurdist teen ads right now that would make no sense to anyone pretty much over the age of 30? Well, it's working for them, with luxury in decline. So I think that it's sort of the space for small brands now who are, again, empowered by social media. And I do think that there's a slight shift now coming out of the pandemic that bigger brands are now thinking again about how they have to invest in brand marketing. We saw it with Adidas and Adidas's incredible cultural strategy over the last few years that has really helped them gain market share.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we I think you did this work, Ben. Just looked at insurgent brands, and I think we were sort of fascinated by Liquid Death and Prime, and I had a practical experience with Prime because I had to spend like almost a weekend trying to find Prime because my kids mentioned it to me. No, you don't understand. We've got to go to Asda. So we went to Asda, couldn't find it anywhere, and then someone working in the shop took me under their wing and said, "Just come back at 12." Absolutely incredible. And my kids, for actually a relatively short period of time, my kids were really, really into Prime and all the different flavours and colours and all the rest of it. And coming out of participation and the sort of passion that gets ignited within communities, I think you'd looked at the idea of the insurgent brand and what can be done today in their sort of social first world.
Yeah, I think our observation was working with a kind of classic FMCG brand that's got a big stable of brands. And we've got two problems. One is our big brands are having all their share stolen by small brands. And we've got loads of small brands that we don't know what to do with. And we were like, could you make your small brands a bit more like those ones that are stealing the share from your big ones? And they're like, no, that's not really how we run them, and they run the small ones as if they're small. And we said, right, give us one of your brands. We'll create a little startup inside the agency. We'll get some creators, we'll get some influencers, we'll get Idris Elba involved, and just try and adopt that different model. And it really worked. And I think that's that sense of back to experimentation. It's like if you are a big brand, then the small brands are the places that you can go and do all that.
And it is economic. Like from a CEO, finance director thing, you have to deliver returns that are ahead of the economy. And if you invest in those programmatic and other routine things, you will make a return and it will make more money than it costs, but you're not going to deliver outstanding returns, and you need things in your portfolio that deliver that kind of growth. So you can invest in new technologies, new segments, new markets, or in some form of insurgent marketing, which is hacking, because the reason brands are always looking for the next TikTok is that you can hack the economics, that you don't have to be Coca-Cola to cut through, and that you can grow relative to others and you can gain share. Somebody said many generations ago that creativity is the only legal unfair advantage in business, and media creativity and choosing how to grow an apparently elite luxury brand is sort of part of the puzzle, but you're just trying to find your way up the snakes and ladders board. But usually when I've seen whole industries go into that economic drive, it becomes quite addictive, first of all, because they can see on their dashboard the returns that they're getting. And then secondly, disappointingly, everybody does it and they get diminishing returns and becomes more and more economic. And again, they have the data to show that. It's not easier to be a challenger bank, just has an automatic inbuilt marketing advantage, an authentic brand speaking to people that actually care about it. And it's almost bound to be interesting, a little bit insurgent.
Yeah, and I think that's the participation thing for me. It's like, if you see the internet and you think, oh, good, what we have here is targeting, and we can target all these individuals, and if we just kind of keep targeting them enough at the right moments, then enough of them at some point will decide to buy our product. If you do that, that'll work, but work for a really short period of time. You're not looking for performance as clicks. You're building a network of connections. You're trying to become your own social media brand.
I think that's another thing I've loved about generations of Iris strategists is the yin and yang of really, really hardcore data and insight and actually finding out some wrinkle about the business or how some things could work, and the sort of fabulous furry freak brothers being on the leading edge and really genuinely passionate involved in new things in culture, but being able to bridge those, because there were loads of bloggers early in the sort of new strategy years who sort of felt that strategy was kind of like a poem and it was what you felt and, kind of other stuff, but they didn't actually weren't able to make a rationale that made it stack up. And sometimes instinctively it would still be interesting to do. And lots of fashion brands trade brilliantly on just that. Being able to arc that, I think, is a really unusual skill. Even as a human being, to be able to be in both conversations is a little bit unusual. And I think Iris just had an epic run of people, up to you, who can actually have both sides of that conversation.
Yeah, and it's brilliant to hear that. And obviously we've grown up within Iris, so we just don't understand. Can't really understand it that way. We're just sort of doing it. It just happens.
Don't you meet
it's chemical.
people from other agencies and think they're just in a different world?
Yeah,
I do. I personally do.
well, it's like what's really good about it is sort of to do with the company culture. It's collaborative, and it's also an interest and quest for magical things that are breakthrough. So there's a sort of joined motivation, if you like, joint motivation for that. Every now and again, though, you do come across like people who've come from other agencies that are much more singular in terms of their skills or experiences, and quite often they're like just really impressive because they just sound so confident. They're just so clear. Whereas within the context of Iris, there's a lot more uncertainty, and there's something important about that though, because it's much more exploratory and experimental.
I was explaining this place to somebody I worked with in another agency, another industry, effectively, design, and he said, "Oh, what did you like about them?" And I said it was literally the most supportive place I'd ever worked. There's always an edge of political risk to going out there on a limb, saying stuff when it's still a bit awkward and you haven't worked it out. But even though it was really punchy and ambitious and commercial and pacey, you always felt that you weren't in personal or political risk going out on a limb to suggest something different, even if people thought you were being a bit weird or whatever, which was quite often the case in my case. But that's such a powerful multiplier, really, for every project, because in most agencies, it's kind of like a play. And if you're saying something that isn't really what the creative director likes or the account director likes, over time, you're going to become that weird one that doesn't get invited to meetings or other stuff, but it's really not supportive. I think partly it grows really driven, egotistical people because they sort of have to survive such a negative Spartan environment.
Yeah.
I do think we've always started from that premise we talked about at the start, which is we don't really know what we're doing, which for a long time felt like a sort of let's not tell anyone that, and then over time it's like, oh no, hold on, no one knows what they're doing, and that's kind of the point. And actually, and we had this the other day, Karen and I working on this brand strategy for our friends at Fritz Kohler, and the one place we know what we're doing finally is we have a method of doing brand strategy that we've kind of had for about 10 years now, and Karen's joined us and gone, that's way out of date. It's totally changed. You need to do it this way instead. And it was so refreshing. It's like, oh yeah, of course. We don't know what we're doing. Karen, how do we do brand strategy these days then? And
Well, I think that we had a chat about it in terms of, and to your point about Iris being a place where there's a lot of different people and like cultivating difference and different skill sets so that we have this sort of what Ben and I were talking about as sort of productive tension is particularly good for strategy because I almost feel that if I go into a meeting and there's immediate consensus right away, like something fishy is going on. Like we haven't dug deep enough into a problem. We haven't, thought hard enough or brought enough of ourselves into it. And I think that productive tension specifically for strategy is so important because culture and participation are thorny and, competing brands are thorny and these are big issues. So that sort of cultivating difference in order to create that productive tension, I think has really good results. I mean, that was a great pitch. We had so much fun. So
I just want to finish, if it's okay, with just a quick point of view on environmental climate, and I know that we all have a similar perspective, but I know that you guys have got go much deeper into it than I have done, and I just want to get a sense of what you think is going on because there's a definite sense that commitment to climate and reversing climate change is now not where it was, and I know that you've written a lot about the industry and what it needs to be doing, and I know that you have also written quite a few books on the topic as well. So it'd be just good to get a general sense about activism and what is now starting to happen within the context of climate change.
Nothing about what's happening right now is surprising. I think we've seen the same pattern. I mean, when I joined Iris, I saw John talking about green marketing and saying that green is the new digital. And I was like, right, here we go. And then the crash happened and it sort of disappeared for a few years and then came back. And then when we had COVID and everything that's happened, I thought, oh no, I know what's going to happen. I remember this from last time around. And so you do get these waves of short-termism, basically, same thing, stopping people from worrying about the long term, which is now more like the medium term. So I think, that's what's happening right now. I think I feel reassured knowing that whenever it comes back twice as hard. And I think the brands, the companies, the individuals who are in place and ready for that will be the ones that really help to drive that change. And when it does happen, it will happen. It will accelerate very quickly because everyone will suddenly realise that we've been sitting on our hands for 3 or 4 years.
100% agree with that. 2007 was like what the FT called a wave of eco hype, and then the financial correction happened in 2008. Interest went away. 2019, year of street protests, Greta, all of that stuff. Then lockdown and other things, and Trump and elections and wars in Ukraine, everything. And we're in that constant sort of oscillation and cycle. And we're at quite a low point in that. During those upswings, I spend a lot of time with corporates, the Pepsis, IKEAs, other people who have science-based targets and are committed to ESG. You can't even use the word ESG, if it's a word, in an investor meeting in America at the moment. You might as well throw woke in as well.
Oh, no.
Incredible. But during those fallow periods, I remember the actual dot-com crash, and I did a master's and got to know my new baby. It was really sort of tumblewheel going through the economy, except that people were doing really new things and they were starting to build things. And during this sort of current lull, I've been working with new kinds of proteins, converting, not personally, but how do you communicate, converting ships to new fuels, really interesting biotech and other things that are deep climate tech innovation. And there is still investment for those things, but sometimes it's in like government incubators in Finland and things like that. So I hope that when the corporate market picks up and the winds of favour are sort of pushing this direction again, there'll be loads of really new, interesting things coming to market that materially change energy and food and building materials.
And I think that's what audiences are looking for. I do so much work just looking at opinions about climate change. Everyone cares. Everyone's more knowledgeable than ever. But especially among young people, there's this sense of powerlessness and like people are just basically waiting for leadership or the ability to change, and are at a loss of what they can do to truly make an impact. So I think a large part of this then is just driven by finding new ways to encourage participation. Young people want it, but they're waiting for leadership, both from brands, but also, of course, from governments, because brands are sort of limited by the regulatory pressure that's put on them in many cases. So I think it's fighting that apathy that is like the problem of today.
There was did you see the, what was it called? Digital sobriety, but there was that whole thing that blew up when somebody published a survey saying that Netflix and porn are basically pushing the climate over the edge, and video streaming. And then everybody was blaming Gen X, and they said, no, but we watch on small screens. Look at and that somebody did the calculation that actually went, your EastEnders is much worse than my Netflix and porn. But I think any way that you can meaningfully engage, you can get electric cars. Electric cars have been really exciting in some parts of the world. I just worked on the launch of an electric motorbike. There are places where people who are interested can engage, but I think it is really, we're in a bit of an ice age politically because there's so many other difficult and dangerous things happening in the world, like new governments and other stuff as well, and their policies that. But
I do think there's a sort of like demand side bit and there's a supply side bit, and the more time I spend in it, the more I realise it's the supply side that will drive it, and it's kind of back to, it's really, really competitive out there. You are an insurgent brand. What can you fight on? And it's one of the things that you can win on. And so if you're 5% better on something around sustainability, you will outperform someone who isn't. And therefore, how do you take that to market? How do you make more of that? And that's only going to become more and more true. So I think it's not going to come from demand. It will come from competition in the market will be the thing that keeps driving it forward, I think.
One other thing I'd add, sorry, because you said quick question, but good luck with that. There's been these waves going up the beach and then receding, but there is a higher tide. And, one sign of that is purpose. Like, we sort of believed in purpose-driven brands in the 90s, but our only two examples were Benetton and Body Shop, and everybody else was about pleasing shareholders and doing things that were nice. Now, most companies you meet of any size or stripe will have some kind of sense of purpose, and they'll use that to drive recruitment. And all sorts of other goods rather than just like sort of having a woke purpose that you push on to consumers. But I think that's been a genuine change in business culture, is the idea that you can be in any organisation something of a hybrid of a charity that's doing things for people's goods and a commercial money box.
Well, back to green is the new digital. It's like, we've now kind of realised that it's not optional. There isn't a kind of, I'll be the really successful non-digital brand. It's like, no. And I think it's the same thing. We still think it's an either or, but actually what we're saying is it's just the cost of doing business now.
Yeah, fantastic. And that's a great way to finish up the episode. Ben, Karen, John, thanks so much. Thank you so much for tuning in. Did I say we're an award-winning podcast? This has been Iris 25, our Christmas special. Sorry, no Michael Bublé, but never mind, maybe next year. Please feel free to download this wherever you get your podcasts.